Your absence teaches louder than your presence ever begged. That's the truth most never see until the silence is screaming louder than your softest efforts ever could. You tried, not once, not twice, but every day, in small, consistent ways. Your voice was gentle, your love patient, your concern constant. You were the steady force in the chaos, the calm in their disarray, the warmth in their winter, but that consistency bred comfort, and comfort often turns into expectation. They assumed you'd always be there, that your light would always shine, that your support would never falter, that your patience had no edge, and so they overlooked you. They mistook presence for permanence. They grew used to your kindness, began to see it as routine. Your care became background noise in their world of distractions. You stopped being appreciated not because you lost value but because they stopped looking closely. People think it's the loud departures that hurt the most, the slammed doors, the shouted words, the tearful goodbyes, but often the most profound realization doesn't come with sound. It comes with the lack of it. It arrives in the quiet, in the days where they don't receive your check-ins, in the moments where your voice isn't the one calming their anxiety, in the long, lonely afternoons when they realize no one else texts to see if they're okay. That's when it hits. That's when they understand what they had. Not because you told them, not because you reminded them, but because you stopped. You see, presence is powerful, but absence is revealing. When someone steps back, when someone chooses themselves after giving endlessly, that gap is undeniable. That shift in energy, it stings. Suddenly their life feels heavier, but they can't quite explain why. The weight isn't in what's added, it's in what's missing. That emptiness, it's shaped like you. It echoes with every gesture you once gave without them asking. The messages you sent before they needed to speak, the patience you extended when they pulled away, the way you saw through their walls even when they pushed you out. All those invisible gifts, they're not invisible anymore. They're absent, and that's what forces them to see. Because absence doesn't just teach, it reminds. It plays memories like films at midnight. It projects every smile they didn't return, every favor they didn't acknowledge, every moment they dismissed your depth. It replays their indifference. And suddenly they're wide awake in a room full of regret. Suddenly they wish they had listened closer, held you tighter, seen you clearer. But by then you're gone. Not in anger, not with malice, just with peace. A quiet, unwavering peace that says, I did my part. I gave my all. And now I choose me. And it's that peace that teaches best. Because nothing is more jarring than realizing someone you once depended on is no longer an option. They can scroll through old messages, revisit memories, even hear your laughter in their mind. But they can't reach you. Not really. Because your energy has shifted. Your space is now protected. Your time is now valued by the one person who never failed to see your worth. And that's when the lesson becomes permanent. That's when they understand your value wasn't in what you did, but in who you were. You weren't just someone who showed up. You were someone who stayed, even when staying meant sacrificing parts of yourself. You were someone who gave, even when the giving went unnoticed. You were someone who loved beyond the surface, even when they were guarded. And now you're someone who left, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally realized that being taken for granted is not love, it's neglect in disguise. So your absence becomes their teacher, a stern one that offers no makeup tests, no second chances. It's final, and it's fair, because you gave every opportunity for understanding. You offered clarity, you provided chances, and all of it was met with distance, avoidance, excuses. So now they learn the hard way. They learn that people like you are rare, that presence like yours can't be replicated, that emotional availability, that empathy, That steady loyalty, it doesn't grow on trees. It doesn't appear in every connection. It's rare. It's precious. It's priceless. And when it's gone, it leaves a void, a gaping hollow space where once lived a warmth they never knew they needed so deeply. They try to fill it with distractions, with others, with noise. But nothing quite fits, nothing quite soothes, nothing quite compares, because that space was carved for you, not for what you did, but for who you were, for how you made them feel, for how safe they were in your energy. Even if they never said it out loud, they realize it too late. And that's okay, because this isn't about them. It never was. This is about you, your growth, your clarity, your strength. You've learned that being present for someone who avoids emotional depth is a battle already lost unless they choose to change. You've learned that begging to be seen is a song that breaks your own voice. So you stopped singing. You stopped reaching. You walked away with grace. Now your absence does the speaking. And it speaks volumes. It says everything your words were too kind to express. It speaks in silence. It teaches in stillness. It echoes in every place you once stood. It reminds them again and again that you weren't replaceable. You weren't convenient. You weren't a phase. You were the exception. You were the safe harbor in their storm. And now you're the lesson they'll never forget. That's the moment realization begins. Not with fireworks or apologies, but in subtle recognition, a slow awareness that not everyone shows up ready. Some walk in only when it's too late to rebuild what they dismissed. You see, many people think presence is the ultimate act of care. But real understanding arrives when someone values you before absence forces them to. The ones who see clearly don't wait for distance to discover depth. They acknowledge your essence while you're still standing beside them, not when you've walked away. There are souls who can recognize rarity without losing it first. They don't treat emotional honesty as inconvenience. They don't flinch at connection. They don't dodge vulnerability. Instead, they lean in. They hold space for it. They make room for your complexity without shrinking your presence. Those are the ones who never gamble with someone's heart, never toy with a spirit they're not ready to protect, because they understand this one truth. Value isn't measured in absence, it's honored in presence. When you care deeply, when you give your all, when your energy radiates sincerity, it deserves recognition in real time. Not romanticized in memory, not idealized in hindsight, but embraced while it's living, breathing, offering. You shouldn't have to disappear to be appreciated. You shouldn't have to break before they realize what you were holding together. That's the difference between genuine connection and shallow attachment. One sees you clearly while you're present. The other regrets once you've stepped away. You may have spent time trying to convince someone of your worth, trying to soften your approach, trying to be enough in silence. But those efforts are unnecessary in spaces where you're already seen, where your effort doesn't need translation, where your sensitivity isn't mocked but mirrored. Because real ones notice things others ignore, the little ways you reach out, the kindness hidden in your tone, the consistency that speaks louder than grand gestures. They listen closely even when words are few. They remember details you barely mention. They care in ways that don't need to be explained. And they don't wait for you to go missing before understanding that what you bring can't be duplicated. That kind of awareness doesn't chase replacements. It doesn't compare, doesn't measure love against convenience. It simply knows, instinctively, that certain spirits aren't meant to be handled lightly. Avoidants, on the other hand, often don't notice until silence becomes their only companion, until memories become more vivid than the present. They search for you in faces that can't match your frequency. They seek you in interactions that fall short of your depth, because they realize what was once close, once available, once unconditional, has shifted beyond reach, and nothing new satisfies what was once effortless in your presence. You were never just another person passing through. You were the one who stayed even when doors felt half open. The one who gave when you weren't met with the same. The one who loved in places that had no room for love. That's what makes you unforgettable. You didn't try to fix them. You didn't demand change. You simply offered purity, and that offering now lingers like a melody they can't replay. A song they didn't learn until it stopped. But again, this isn't about what they missed. It's about what you deserve. Those who truly see you, they don't wait for emotional collapse to appreciate you. They don't let your loyalty collect dust. They step forward, unafraid of closeness, unthreatened by emotion. They don't freeze when love looks like consistency. They lean in. They match energy. They build with you, not at you. Your role isn't to convince anyone that you matter. It's not to dim yourself so someone else feels comfortable. It's not to give endlessly until your cup is dry. Your presence alone is a gift. Your openness is sacred. Your vulnerability is strength. And those who deserve proximity will know it. Not after loss but during your offering. They won't ask for you to shrink. They won't confuse distance with space. They'll understand that people like you don't happen twice. You've carried enough of the weight for others. You've sacrificed joy in places that didn't reciprocate. You've stood firm in unstable connections. And still you gave. Still you showed up. But now your peace is priority. Now your presence is reserved for those who never need to be reminded. Who never take you for granted. Who look you in the eyes and say, I see you. I value you, I'm here with you. They won't fumble what others dropped. They won't ghost when emotions rise. They won't vanish when honesty surfaces. They stay grounded, because they know the cost of losing someone who never asked for more than mutual effort. They know the importance of seeing someone, truly seeing while they're still within reach. They don't risk it. They treasure it. That's the love you were always worthy of. The energy that matches yours. The connection that doesn't need performance or chasing or survival mode. Just presence. Just awareness. Just mutuality. The kind that doesn't just recognize value. It protects it. So remember this: you are not here to be understood only through absence. You are not meant to be remembered after being ignored. You are meant to be met, fully, clearly, intentionally, by those who know better than to let something irreplaceable slip through their fingers. Because when someone tells you you're too much, too intense, too emotional, too available, they're not actually speaking about you, they're speaking about their inability to receive. They're naming their own limitations, not your worth. You weren't overwhelming. You were offering everything someone unprepared couldn't hold. That's the truth. They can't say out loud. It wasn't you who brought too much to the table. It was them who showed up with empty hands. There's a painful beauty in realizing you were never too anything. You were simply honest, real, unfiltered in a world addicted to superficiality. You didn't water down your affection. You didn't hide your care behind indifference. You didn't ration your loyalty based on convenience. You gave all you had, not out of desperation, but because that's who you are, someone who leads with intention, someone who loves without keeping score. Yet somehow they made you feel as though your openness needed adjusting. They didn't say it directly, but their discomfort spoke volumes. They'd retreat when you leaned in, shut down when your emotions surfaced, disappear when vulnerability knocked on the door, and in those moments you questioned yourself. You wondered if you were the problem, if maybe, just maybe, you should be colder, quieter, less available. You started editing yourself to accommodate someone who didn't have the capacity to witness you fully. But that's the trap. When you shrink, they don't grow. When you dilute, they don't deepen. All that happens is you lose pieces of your truth to fit inside a container too small for your soul. You weren't too expressive. They were too guarded. You weren't asking for reassurance. You were seeking resonance. You weren't dramatic. You were communicating. And when someone calls that too much, it means they've never been met with genuine emotional transparency before. What they don't tell you is that intensity is a mirror. When someone is unable to look into it, they will say the reflection is broken, but your light wasn't the problem. It just exposed their shadows. And when people are not ready to face themselves, they will always blame the one holding the lamp. So you stopped. You stopped pouring. You stopped explaining. You stopped showing up with your whole heart and started protecting it instead. Not because you became less loving, but because you finally understood that not every person deserves unfiltered access to what they do not cherish. You didn't go numb. You went wise, because being labeled as too much only ever comes from people who've grown used to too little. People who interpret consistency as pressure, who view connection as vulnerability rather than strength, who run from the very thing they claim to want. And that's not your fault. It never was. You were showing them what real looks like, what care feels like, what intimacy actually requires, and they flinched. Not because you failed, but because they weren't equipped. You weren't excessive. You were just complete. You brought more than surface. You offered presence, attention, empathy, and in return you got silence. Avoidance, discomfort masquerading as detachment. But even then, you kept giving, hoping your love might make them ready. But readiness can't be gifted. It can't be taught through sacrifice. You can't love someone into emotional maturity. You can't soothe the heart that keeps hiding behind walls. You can't offer wholeness to someone still searching for their missing parts and temporary fixes. So you walked, quietly. Not in anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. You stopped over-explaining. Stopped justifying emotions to someone who treated them like burdens. You stepped back and finally saw yourself. Not as they painted you, but as you are. And in that moment everything changed. Not because they validated you, but because you no longer needed them to. And they'll remember. They always do. They'll think back on your passion, your attentiveness, your way of seeing through the cracks. They'll meet others who don't show up like you did, who keep things surface, who don't ask the second question, and they'll miss it. Not just the connection, but the comfort of being known without having to explain everything. They'll long for the feeling of being seen and heard, and held in ways they didn't realize were rare. But by then you've grown beyond the need to be proven right. You're not looking for recognition. You're not waiting for the apology, because you finally understand. You were never too much, you were just in the wrong place. You were showing up in spaces built for pretending, not for truth. You were offering depth to someone swimming in shallow waters. And when you stopped, when you left, when you let go, you created room for someone else. Someone who doesn't just tolerate your intensity, but treasures it. That's the real shift. When you stop seeing your nature as a flaw, and start recognizing it as a filter, the right person won't flinch at your feelings. They won't disappear when things get honest. They'll meet you there, fully, openly, without hesitation. They won't call it too much, they'll call it home. And the more you understand this, the less you bend, the less you apologize for being whole in a world that sometimes only knows fragments. You start standing taller in your truth. You speak without shrinking. You love without bargaining. You stop being afraid of your own reflection. So if anyone ever says you were too expressive, too involved, too willing, too available, remember that wasn't criticism. That was confession. A quiet admission that they couldn't meet you at your level. Not because you were difficult to love, but because they hadn't yet learned how to receive something real. You weren't too much. You were just never meant to settle for someone not ready to handle everything you are. And even when they finally realize what they lost, you've already traveled far beyond their reach. Not in distance, but in evolution. Growth has taken root in your bones. Solitude has become sanctuary, not punishment. You're no longer lingering in places that require proving. You don't look back waiting for recognition. You no longer need delayed revelations to validate what you always knew about yourself, that your love was honest, your intention was pure, your presence was rare. There's a strange kind of awakening that happens when you stop waiting for someone to see you through the lens you always offered them. The ache of not being chosen fades the moment you choose yourself without hesitation. You begin to notice life responding differently. Days feel lighter, nights feel softer, not because pain disappears overnight, but because self-trust takes its place. You stop replaying moments where they turned away and begin investing that same energy into the spaces that turn toward you. You begin to understand that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about no longer letting what happened define who you are now. They may finally grasp what you meant, long after the silence settled in. They might sort through memories, hoping to find what they once ignored. They may even attempt to return, expecting the same version of you they left behind. But that version no longer exists. She's evolved, he's grown. They've become someone who doesn't need closure from someone incapable of showing up fully the first time. There's something powerful about that moment when you stop needing someone's understanding to feel understood. You remember how much explaining you once did, how many chances you handed over like spare change, how much of your peace was interrupted by attempts to hold space for someone unwilling to meet you there. Now you realize peace doesn't require negotiation. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It simply exists, unapologetically, within you, built from every step you took toward yourself. The truth is, when someone avoids, delays, detaches, it isn't a mystery. It's clarity wrapped in disappointment. The moment someone shows they can't meet you emotionally, believe them. Not because they're cruel, but because they haven't yet learned how to hold what you carry. And it's not your job to teach them, fix them, or wait for them to arrive. It's your job to protect your energy like the sacred thing it is. That's where the real shift happens. When you stop molding yourself to fit into unavailable places. When you understand that your consistency, your compassion, your intuition, they're not burdens, they're blueprints for something greater. Someone else's avoidance no longer confuses you. It no longer sends you spiraling into self-doubt. You recognize it for what it is, a defense mechanism rooted in fear, not a reflection of your worth. And when clarity settles in, freedom follows, not freedom from them, but freedom from your old patterns. You no longer reach for explanations that never come. You no longer craft stories to justify their behavior. You no longer lose sleep, wondering what else you could have done. Because you did everything. You showed up again and again. Even when the door stayed half closed. That version of you deserves celebration, not regret. Healing isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's sitting alone with memories, and realizing you no longer want to go back, even if the chance was offered. Sometimes it's watching them resurface with open hands, but feeling nothing but calm detachment. Because peace isn't built from longing. It's built from understanding what no longer serves your spirit. You're allowed to outgrow people, especially those who only appreciated you in hindsight. Especially those who pushed you away, while calling it space. Especially those who waited until your silence echoed louder than your words ever did. And even if they change later, even if they arrive eventually, you're under no obligation to shrink back into the past, to accommodate them. Growth isn't a circle, it's a forward-moving path. And you've walked far. There's a different strength that forms in the absence of being seen. It teaches you to stop waiting for someone else to hand you the love you've always given so freely. It leads you inward, toward your own heart, toward the places within you that already know you're worthy, that already know you deserve. Without confusion, presence without performance, love without delay, it becomes second nature. This discernment, you start noticing who aligns, not by how they speak, but by how they stay. Not by promises, but by presence. Not by gestures, but by consistency. The ones who feel safe don't ask you to mute your emotions. They invite them. The ones who are ready don't make you prove anything. They meet you where you are, with no agenda. That's the peace you've been building. That's the love you've become. because you're not who you were when they walked away. You're stronger now, softer too, but not for them, for yourself. You've learned how to offer gentleness inward, how to rest in your own energy, how to exist without craving validation from those who couldn't receive you. And maybe that's the greatest victory of all, when you no longer need their realization to feel whole. You once wanted them to see what they missed. Now it doesn't matter if they ever do, because what they missed isn't something they can reclaim. You're not a moment they can revisit. You're not a memory they can rewrite. You're a future they no longer belong to. And that future, it's rooted in truth, in alignment, in connection that doesn't flinch under pressure, or disappear at the first sign of depth. They might finally understand what they had. But healing never waits for their understanding. Healing keeps going. It keeps moving, building, growing, with or without their arrival. Because healing is yours, and you no longer wait to be chosen. You choose yourself, over and over. Every day, with love, with strength, with grace.